January 26, 1861, Coyotero Apaches raid the southern Arizona ranch of John Ward and abduct his young son, Felix Ward. The U.S. military demands Chief Cochise of the Chiricahua tribe to release the boy. Cochise honestly replies that he does not have the boy, but Lieutenant Boscombe does not believe him. Boscombe arrests and holds Cochise's family hostage as ransom for Felix Ward's return. Cochise raids a wagon train, kills the Mexicans, but captures 3 Americans that he plans to use in exchange for his family. Boscombe refuses and Cochise kills the prisoners. Boscombe kills Cochise's family in retribution. The boy Felix Ward is now a member of the Coyotero tribe. He is now an Apache. This is the cause of a war that will last more than 25 years and cost countless lives. In day, settlers, Mexicans and Americans, soldiers and civilians alike. Late in the war, General Crook enlists the help of Apache scouts, Apaches who ally with the U.S. government to capture, quote, renegades. Apaches who refuse to stay within the boundaries of the now allocated concentration camps. Today, we call them reservations. The abducted young boy, Felix Ward, is now a young man. He is caught between worlds and cultures, multilingual, Mexican-Irish, raised Apache. He becomes one of Crook's scouts and adopts a new name, Mickey Free. It was chaos. Americans versus Apache. Apache versus Americans. Mexicans versus Americans. Americans versus Mexicans. Apache versus Mexicans. Mexicans versus Apache. Apache versus Apache. Apache versus the military. Everyone versus everyone.
Nindende daniki da iklina.
Nindinde du.
Welcome to another episode of InRange. You've made it to Arizona territory, circa 1875, and that was a mistake, because you're now embroiled in one of the worst conflicts on American soil that ever has occurred. I'm here representing some of the men that would have fought with the Ende, or the Apache, against the federal forces. A lot of people don't realize this, but whites fought with the Apaches fought with the whites. There were Indian scouts, as Crook called them, that fought and helped find renegade Apaches, but there were also Americans or whites that integrated into Apache society and adopted some of their ways, and in some circumstances, fought with them. And that's what I'm representing today. Kevin here will be representing the 4th Cavalry, but the 4th, 6th, and 10th were active here in Arizona. We're going to go through the guns and gear of that. But so what I have here is a Springfield 1870 and the appropriate gear, but what we're going to do is walk you through what we're wearing because this is relevant to this video, and we're going to have shooting today demonstrating both of these on the clock. So why don't we go ahead and start off with our footwear, our boots. That sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, so I'm actually wearing, these are a legitimate reproduction, of course, Apache boots. This is what about the Ende typically would have wore. You see that they lace at the front like essentially a standard shoe, but then they can actually wrap up and then you tie leather around the top and you have essentially protection against cholla, rocks, all the dangers of the desert. And this would be what you would call the fighting mode. You bring them up, tie them here, and that would protect your legs the most you could. When you were wearing them more casually, you would take this leather off and then fold them over. But Kevin, you got cavalry boots.
Yeah, the U.S. government had so much surplus Civil War stuff after the Civil War, obviously, that they were still issuing Civil War gear up till the mid-1870s. Starting in the mid-1870s, they started having dedicated, upgraded gear. These are later model cavalry boots. They've got the extended upper to protect you when you're riding horses against, mesquite trees and bushes and everything else. And these are the standard issue spurs that they use because they needed to spur the horses, but they didn't want to hurt them, so they've got little rounded nubs on there. But these are pretty common of the era. So.
Now, but your gear is designed pretty much to be for up to being mounted.
Yes.
And the Apache boots were designed to be on foot because the Apache were far more on foot than they ever were on horse.
Yeah.
And in fact, the Apache would beat the cavalry in terms of movement on ground by foot.
Yes, many times.
There were situations in which they would find the renegades, that's the term they used at the time, not mine, and the cavalry couldn't follow them because the Apache, an entire family, women, children, and warriors would go up and over the mountain in a way that was almost inexplicable.
And impossible for a horse to follow them.
Yep, and the cavalry.
And the cavalry, these are the riding heels, so they're good for riding, they're not as good for walking.
Okay, and then we get to pants. Now I'm just wearing essentially what would have been, these are again another reproduction. A lot of times the Apache themselves would have been essentially bare-legged, but I'm not. I'm a white guy with the Apaches. So I'm wearing essentially jeans. These are really kind of not Levi's, but Levi types, and there are suspenders under this that hold them up, not a belt. But they are quite comfortable, and as you can see, baggy and very protective. Looks like you got wool.
Yeah, these are, again, these are later, post-Civil War. They're a little bit different construction, but they're still heavy gauge wool, very thick, and they're very durable. In the winter, they're nice and warm. In the summer, they're not awful.
Really?
They're not as awful. After you wear them, you break them in, they're not quite as scratchy. And I can wear these all day and not be annoyed. And maybe if it's 120.
Okay, fair.
Because they're baggy. Anything that's baggy in the desert is better than tight because you get a little bit of airflow and it's not so bad.
A lot of people, when they watch InRange videos, think, how do you wear so much in the desert? And the reality is you actually want to wear more, not less.
You want to cover every square inch of your skin in the desert.
And then we get the load-bearing kit here. And so back then you were essentially using bandoliers. And I would be pretty well heeled in regards to the Apache cause, although they did get a lot of weaponry and it was possible. But as a result, I pretty much have to deal with what I could find surplus. I'm not going to be issued anything by the government. So this would have been essentially a surplus style Civil War holster. However, I've got it in tan because of the desert heat. Got a bandolier holding my cartridges. These are 44 Henry rimfire replicants. We'll get to the guns more in a minute. And I've got what you call a prairie belt, which is a cloth belt holding 50-70 cartridges, which we're going to get to in a moment. But this is something I probably landed up scavenging, either buying or scavenging off someone that was dead. Yeah. You got government issue gear.
Yeah, again, this is government issue. This is the early leather gear. They started out with that because that's what they had and that's what they knew. And even though it's not quite Civil War, it's adapted from Civil War. Although this is a Civil War cat pouch, and they tended to use these for pistol ammo, and a regular issue holster with the issue Colt 45 in there. So, and then this is it's kind of a modified. They had about 20 different styles of pouches to hold rifle ammo, and this one's kind of like a McKeever pouch, but it's not exactly. I've actually got pistol rounds in here, and also it's got more 45-70 rounds in there. So it was field expedient stuff out in the desert, in the western and the frontier area. They used what they got and what they could make.
Well, it was there. I mean, the supply chain was strained and long.
The supply chain was intermittent, I guess best we could say.
Oh no, they weren't intermittent. The supply chain was stopped by
and the Indians.
Some of us kind of cut those supply chains short.
Cut the supplies short. And then I, of course, have the Mills belt, which was an issue starting in the 1870s. It was issued they originally had leather cartridge belts for the rifles and the pistol ammo, but then they learned early on that verdigris, which is corrosion on the brass, with the leather, with the chemicals used to tan the leather and everything, caused the brass to corrode, and then they wouldn't chamber in the rifle, the pistol, or they would chamber and then they wouldn't extract, and that caused all kinds of issues.
And that doesn't take long to happen. If you're out in the desert heat and you're sweating on your leather belt with those brass cartridges in it, you will get that essentially brass rust. It's verdigris. It looks green, and that could absolutely prevent. It may not prevent insertion, but it might prevent extraction, which is even worse. So then you've also got a standard shirt there.
Or standard, this is the standard. It's a cotton. It's not a wool shirt. There were wool and there were some cotton ones, but this is the pattern. This is the pattern that the Army issued at the time frame, and plain old cloth suspenders, which is what they had.
The ones under my shirt you can't see are leather. Actually,
leather was common, but the Army. This is what the Army issued. This is exactly what they would issue.
You got a hat.
And the hat, they went through multiple iterations of the hats, and again, up through the mid-1870s, they had standard leftover Civil War slouch hats and kepis. They usually used kepis in the garrison. You don't want a kepi out here in the sun.
No.
So they came up with this design, and it actually works pretty good. It's lightweight, and it covers your face. And
see, it's protecting your eyes from the sun right now, in fact.
It is right now.
And you've got the 4th Cav logo on there.
4th Cavalry, which was based at Fort Huachuca, Camp Huachuca at the time. And then also the 6th Cavalry is involved, and the 9th and 10th, mostly more the 9th than the 10th, but the Buffalo Soldiers.
The 10th being famous for being Buffalo Soldiers, which were African Americans that essentially were brought into the Indian Wars.
Yes.
Yeah. And now let's go ahead and go through the guns. So I'll start with mine, and then we'll go with yours. Okay. So this is an 1870 Springfield. Now, a lot of you may not be aware of the 1870 Springfield, and again, there's a video on the channel that's more in depth on this, but an 1870 Springfield started off as an 1861 Springfield rifle musket for the most part, and there was something called the Allen's conversion, in which they cut out the rear and then added a lock plate, which was a toggle, essentially a trap door, and then sleeved the barrel to make it 50 caliber from the 58 caliber rifled musket. As that was in 1868, they eventually got to 1870, and that's what this model is, where they started making these directly, however, with some surplus parts. In fact, the lock plate on this is from 1861. The date on this is an 1861 piece, and this is an original gun. And the reason I'm using this to represent the opposition is because they only used these for a short duration of time, from 1868 to 1870 in the cartridge 5070. And what happened was they then decided to make the 1873 trapdoor chambered in 4570, ostensibly for better ballistics. And the 1870, 1868 Springfield all became immediate surplus, as did 5070 cartridges. Those all went on to the, quote, civilian market, and a significant number of these landed up in the hands of the opposition. Frontiersmen, Americans, whites, and indigenous forces, including the Apache. In fact, the first time Geronimo surrendered, he surrendered this exact model rifle to John Clum, which is a pretty fascinating story. But that said, this is functionally the equivalent of a 1873 trapdoor, except it's rifle length. The big deficiency here are the sights. This has really bad trough sights. Other than that, it's kind of the equivalent. Now, you've got a cavalry gun.
Yeah, this is the cavalry issued 1873, starting in about 1874 when they started issuing these. This is actually an Italian reproduction, but it's a almost exact duplicate. And they were pretty handy. They're not very heavy, which causes excessive recoil with your standard. The original 45 government was 45 caliber, 70 grains of powder. Well, they ended up changing it and coming up with a 45-55 just for the carbines, which was only 55 grains of powder, which made a lot of difference in the recoil.
And a different bullet weight, 405 grain versus 500
versus
government.
500, so a whole lot less recoil. Because even with the standard weight the carbine load on this is still a handful to shoot.
Yep,
So.
and 5070 I'm shooting is a 450 grain bullet with 70 grains of black powder. You can see them next to each other there.
Yeah.
So 4570 at the bottom and 5070 at the top. 5070, again, being a surplus round. It was a government issue for a short duration of time, but the Apache and a lot of people on the frontier were using 5070 because they could get it, and it became really common because of the surplus rifles. So, that said, this is an original gun, as I said earlier. This one was actually made in 1870, and it's got interesting marks all over it. If you haven't seen the video about the gun, check that out. But the same note, to have both a rifle and a pistol would be a pretty rare circumstance for anyone on either side frequently, although the cavalry more so than mine.
The cavalry was issued handguns.
But it did happen.
Anybody else.
It did happen on both sides. But that said, I'm not going to have the coolest, newest 1873 single action army. So what I have is an 1871 open top. This is a Colt. It is a reproduction by Cimarron. But so what you saw is at the end of the Civil War, they started boring out the cylinders and making something called a Richard Mason's conversion, frequently chambered in 44 Henry rimfire, the same round as the Henry rifle and the later 1866 Winchester. But when they went from essentially converting original Colts, percussion Colts to cartridge Colts, they went to the 1871-72 open top and started making these directly. This is not a conversion. This was made in this guise. The big difference is there's no conversion ring, and there's a rear sight here on the actual barrel, which is a better sight picture. Still chambered in 44 Henry rimfire, which is not a thing you can get today, but I have all of my cartridges I'm using today replicate the 44 Henry rimfire load with black powder. So ballistically equivalent. That said, you were issued a rifle.
The handgun.
A handgun, excuse me.
The handgun. Well, the infamous Colt 45, which everybody's known and heard about. And this is, again, Italian reproduction. This is a reproduction of what was issued to the cavalry troopers starting in 1874. It's got the cartouches and everything. So, and the old infamous 45 Colt.
So you have a much more potent cartridge. The 45 Colt at that time would have been a 250 grain bullet?
250 grain bullet at right around 900 feet per second.
Yeah, and 44 Henry rimfire out of this would be essentially a 200 grain bullet, moving at around 750, 800. Yeah. So not really that big of a deficiency.
No, not really.
But you got more power.
Yeah, a little bit more power.
Yeah. I don't think that we necessarily have a better sight picture, though.
No, it's pretty much the same. This one, it has the old trough for the sight, but it's got a little bit bigger post.
You do have a bigger post, blade. So, what we're going to bring to you today is both Kevin and I are going to shoot this match, the two-gun action challenge match, with this very historic gear, all of it chambered in black powder, and we're going to give you an example or a little taste of what it was to fight the Federals, or to fight as a Federal.
The Indigenous.
or those allied with the Indigenous, in the 1870s. Yeah.
Hey!
Hit! 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 High right.
Oh yeah. I just had to aim.
Right.
Really?
Yep.
Had you worked that out ahead of time? No, he worked that out on the.
Hit!
Okay. That's it. Low. Well. Yeah. Low.
Low. Like almost at the base of the target low.
1 out of 2.
How did Edmund manage to get each other back? Oh,
Hit!
You saw me except the end. I was hitting a lot. Huh?
you know what's you hear all this lore about people making hits at extreme ranges back then?
It happened.
But like, wasn't that more of like the
That was like
range
low,
section
right?
rather
Yeah,
than
it had
the-
specialized gear and extremely skilled people.
Hit!
Unlike today, where you can compensate for bad eyesight, you probably had to have perfect.
People that made those long shots using things are called collimated, more collimated frame sight. You dial in and you have to know the exact distance. I've got a Remington rolling block with one of I can reliably make hits at 600. Like a ladder aperture at the back.
Hit!
Front, yeah, certainly. And then I've done that and I know exactly.
Hit!
But I could do it. And I'm using 45-7. If you look at my rifle blast, I'm like 45 120.
Low. Low left. Hit! Hit!
You're laying on that dirt first. Lay on that next.
Hit! Hit!
And that gun is
Hit! Go ahead, you're good.
Did I hit one over here? No, I did not. Where is it?
I can't see it at all. A little to the left, I think. I did the July June.
Like you're underneath of it, Carl.
Am I?
Yeah. I'm glad somebody can see it. Oh, he did that remote control thing.
Oh, it's hot. Gun's really hot. That's it. That's it.
That's it, right?
Yeah, that's 6.
So we had a couple people.
Catch it.
So I told him. One of them was like, "Hey, you're gonna get." I could actually make more money myself.
Yahoo!
All right, so Kevin, you've done quite a bit of research, clearly, actually, so have I, to be honest, but you've done a lot of research on the cavalry in Arizona and other places, and you had some information you wanted to bring to the audience, which I think is really interesting.
Well, one of the important thing that we're going to deal with today is my research about marksmanship. There was a lot of talk about marksmanship, and then we have the NRA later, which was founded as a marksmanship thing, although the Army didn't get that memo, apparently. So there was basically zero training. You might get a round or two familiarization with your weapons, but that was about it until you were out deployed at wherever you had to go. And in the West, it was because of the supply chain issues they had. Ammunition was scarce, so it wasn't till the aftermath of the battle at the Greasy Grass where the troopers had a problem. And
Little Bighorn.
Little Bighorn, yes. I prefer the Greasy Grass term. But,
I do too.
so, but the troopers got their asses kicked that day, and then the Army said, wait a minute, what happened? So what do we got to do? We need to do marksmanship training. So starting in about 1876, 1875, they started issuing ammunition for training. Well, the grand total issued for training was 20 rounds per trooper per year, which is not much. Anybody that does gun competitions or any kind of guns realizes that's not even a good practice session in one day.
Particularly exaggerated by the ballistics of these cartridges, which have a rainbow arc. So if
Yes,
you can't do
very,
range
very
estimation and don't know how to set your sights, 20 rounds isn't going to get you anywhere near having the
it's
skill to
not,
hit something
yeah.
at range.
And also the fact is very few of those were actually used for training because out, especially in these western frontier outposts, they needed to feed themselves at a lot of times. So a lot of that ammunition was used for foraging, for killing deer and antelope and whatever they happened to have. So pretty much training was zero, even after they started a training program. So
Pointed enemy, pull trigger.
yes, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So you were talking about rounds expended and things like that.
Yeah, I did some research about the rounds that were expended in different conflicts, and the first one that comes to mind was Vietnam. You might have heard about that, and the studies showed that it was about 50,000 rounds expended for one dead enemy soldier, which is really awful. They did a lot of studies. There's been a lot of forensic studies at the Battle of Greasy Grass, Little Bighorn, and it turns out that there was 42,000 rounds that the troopers went into battle with that were lost, that they didn't have. And a lot of troopers lost them all the way. Packs were lost. There were, troopers killed and everything. And it came down to there were about, it was around about 250 rounds per enemy casualty that was fired at.
Dramatic difference.
Yes.
Even with the lack of training.
Yeah, even with the lack of training. But that was, most of the engagements at the Battle of Greasy Grass were from 300 to 1,200 yards. So again, not knowing where your sights were set for whatever range made it really difficult to hit things.
What do you want to call it? The blue force gear rounds. The straight up elastic. Yeah, they're not great for putting back in. Oh yeah. I have one of those for running. I would say so.
Metric like this, it actually makes it somewhat viable.
No. That was the support beam. Okay. There we go. That was a hit.
All was like 5 yards.
Woo! Okay, one of the hazards with these Old West boots, these tall stovepipe boots, is when you go prone, they collect dirt and rocks on your knees, and as soon as you stand up, everything goes down in the boot. So we'll see if we can.
Oh, whoa. Some literal rocks came out.
Yeah, there's a few.
not as. Yeah,
Oh.
there we go.
Well, in that regard, you could see why some guys switch to the Apache boots. That doesn't happen.
That's not helpful.
You! We don't need bullets for you! We kill you with rocks! Hit! Hit! Ooh, he got domed. Hit! 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 Yeah, run, trooper, run!
I still.
Left. Left.
Left?
Yeah, left.
Definitely put his mark on the table.
Hit! Hit left edge though. Hit! Hit! Left of the head. Right. Right. High right. High right. Hit!
It's funny, it's actually pretty closely represents reality because he's had a total of 10 rounds to that gun. Yeah, I shot mine quite a bit.
Literally gave me off the right edge.
We've got 4 training rounds for the year.
Stuff like that. Hit! And orbital rounds got stolen in transit. All sorts of dumb shit.
They also had.
Hit! So, Trooper, this seemed to actually pan out how it might have an actual historical reality.
It really did come close to real life
Yeah.
in this match.
So you had how many rounds on that gun before you came out here to shoot it?
Since I bought this rifle, I've put, I think, 10 rounds through this gun in the last 2 years since I got it. And they were all smokeless powder. They weren't even black powder.
So these are the first black powder rounds you
First
fired?
black powders I fired through the gun.
Okay.
So it is quite analogous to real life on the frontier because the troopers got 10 rounds to maybe practice with in a year. So I actually had 6 months worth of practice before we got to this match. So I had to learn the gun, the holdovers, the sight picture, everything on the clock today, and I did poorly. So,
well, I wouldn't say that. You were doing exactly what they would have had to do, which is
which is what they did was poorly, especially when they came up against the natives who had a lot more rounds through their rifles.
You were learning your gun on the clock.
I was.
They were learning their gun under fire.
Under fire,
right?
yes.
And so the Inde or someone adjacent with them that lived on the frontier full time they didn't come here against their will. This is their home,
Yes.
right? They were defending their home,
yeah.
and they were here, and they had been at years of war, decades of war, with the Mexicans, well, the Spanish then the
first.
Mexicans, now the Americans. It was literally everyone versus everyone. And in fact, you hear me in one of the...
And each other.
Oh, and the different, yes, actually, when we say Ende, that doesn't mean one thing. There's a bunch of different, you have Chiricahua, Coyote, the Mescalero, and they didn't always get along themselves. Not only that, they also fought against the Tohono O'odham, the Navajo or the
Pimas,
Dene.
the Yumas.
Right, so I mean, it was conflict across this region, even before Spaniards got here, right? But it ramped up with the Spaniards and the
did.
Mexicans. In fact, when I was running one of the stages, I said, for you, I don't use bullets, I use a rock.
Yeah.
That was a common saying amongst the Chiricahua, at least, that they used rocks to kill Mexicans because they just had so much hatred for Mexicans, quite honestly. But that said, I had had a little more, not significant, but I had more time with this gun than you did.
Yes.
I had taken it out and I had made sure, or kind of checked out my sights and my zero, if you can call it that. And the reality is, with this gun, this really beat to heck 1870 Springfield, I have to aim over the left shoulder to get reliable hits. But I know to do that.
Yes.
You don't know where you have
know
to.
That.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out the windage on the fly here, and it's with the sight picture, which isn't. It's a pretty comparable, maybe a little worse.
I don't know. They seem pretty similar.
They're very comparable.
When we really compared
when
them,
it
they were
comes down
close.
to- yeah. And I was just having a hard time with the windage. So once I got that figured out, then I did a lot better.
But on that, you really did do much better with the handgun.
Yes. Well, I've got a lot of years of experience shooting, cowboy action shooting one-handed. So.
Sure. Now, do you know how much training did the cavalrymen get with their pistol?
With the pistol, they pretty much got zero.
So that would be even worse, really.
Yeah.
So that did not represent reality.
That did not represent reality.
You were the aces of the aces of
Yeah.
the trooper with a pistol.
Yes.
But you did have a single action army, which does present a better sight picture.
It does. It does have a very usable sight picture. The gun's very ergonomic for its time period, and they're great shooting guns.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Now, another thing we didn't talk about is you have a sling. These guns would have had slings. You can see the sling swivels on there.
Yeah.
But the reality is, on the frontier, the Ende, the frontiersmen, the settlers, the Ende adjacent allies with them frequently didn't bother with a sling. They just carried the gun. They didn't necessarily have two guns either. But cavalry did.
Cavalry did. Well, this goes back to the sling swivel and the sling ring on later carbines. Well, this was common, dating way back hundreds of years. It was common for mounted troops to have something to keep hold of their rifles so they didn't lose it while they were mounted.
I thought single point slings were a modern tactical invention.
No, not really.
Wait, is this also quick detach?
And it's got a quick disconnect. Just like, not much new under the sun these days. So it's quick on. They generally didn't leave it hooked up. They left it in the boot on the saddle, and then they would clip it on when they would dismount or everything. And sometimes if they were going into a charge or something, they clip it on because they didn't want to lose it. But usually they were pretty solid. They were pretty stable and unlikely to come out of the scabbard.
You just made me think of another thing that we should bring to the audience. A lot of people think of the cavalry as fighting on their horse, and that wasn't the case.
No, the cavalry is in the old now. Earlier Civil War, pre-Civil War, there was a lot of cavalry charges, but in the Old West, they didn't really do much fighting on the horses. It did happen, but it wasn't their primary way. It was the skirmish line. That's where they would all deploy at a certain distance apart in a certain area and fight like that.
The horse was there to try to give them the same ability of the indigenous people, which still didn't do it. The indigenous could still outrun them.
They did, yeah.
But they would use the horse to be more mobile.
Yes.
But they would dismount and fight from skirmish lines.
Yes.
Yeah. So overall, even though you got me on the pistol, I don't have the exact scores in front of me, but I think I got you today.
Yeah, I just lack of familiarity with the gun. That's what it was.
Which is huge.
It's huge. It makes a difference.
Yep. So I want to thank you for coming out here and being part of this today.
It's been my pleasure. It was great fun. We had a great time and made a lot of smoke in a beautiful southern Arizona day. And doesn't get much better.
That's one of the fun things we can do at Two Gun, and hopefully you out there watching this can enjoy this, is that I think that, like, obviously people are like, you're LARPing, you're doing this, but yeah, we are. But there's something about wearing the authentic gear.
Using authentic gear.
It teaches you things.
You learn things.
We learned today that my Apache boots don't fill with sand,
Yes.
and yours do.
Yeah.
Right?
And I learned that even when you have a cap pouch full of pistol ammo, it's really hard to load quickly versus the belt.
Cartridge belt.
It made a difference. That's why they evolved to those things. You can see this was before this. This is how they learned. You know, that's why we have such good stuff we did today, because somebody had to figure it out originally.
So this is, I like to think of it as like live fire living history. And in
Yes.
doing that, we get to learn things you wouldn't otherwise, and hopefully we get to bring it to you in the audience, as well as I have to thank everyone out there that supports InRange via Patreon, because it helped us pay for what we did today. I mean, by the way, primers are essentially worth more than gold.
Yeah.
So being able to fire these rounds today, which by the way, 9mm is hard to get, 5.56 is hard to get. What's even harder? A primer.
primer.
And we have to load this ammunition. So we have primers to do that today, and that's because of Patreon. So thank you guys out there for making that possible, keeping InRange alive. That's amazing that you're doing that. If you already are one, again, thank you. If you aren't, please consider it. You can find us at patreon.com/InRangeTV. And if you can't totally get it, maybe you're trying to buy primers for yourself, just subscribe to the channel. We're not just on YouTube, though. You can find us in multiple different distribution points, InRange.tv/watch. More importantly, though, fight the algorithm. Share with your friends. Thanks for watching.